Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Mistress of Philosophy. So, last week we were seeing how Indian systems of philosophy have gotten frozen into certain kinds of boxes. One of the problems with freezing those boxes is that there are little philosophies which do not fit inside these six systems of philosophy at all. And some of them are philosophies that are excluded from the secular study of philosophy. Scholars do study them at the PhD level, or sometimes when you want a topic, you do pick these philosophies and study them. There are a lot of serious studies of Indologists and other people on these texts. But as a system, when you're teaching philosophy, you tend to ignore these things. And it's a lot of problem because of the diversity and the number of philosophies that we have. Perhaps we get to choose only a particular set of philosophies and say, these are the most important things we study. For example, take Shaivism, for example. A lot of people do not study Abhinavagupta in either their younger years in graduate studies or in postgraduate studies. He's mentioned in the sixth system somewhere like Kashmir Shaivism or something, but Kashmir Shaivism only comes into your, if your teacher is interested in it, sometime he may pull it out in class and talk to you about Abhinavagupta. Philosophy of art and aesthetics is not studied unless you end up studying somebody like, J. Garfield's book in your philosophical class, where you would study philosophy in modern India, and then you would look at K.C. Bhattacharya's discussion on the rasa theory, or Hirayana's discussion on the rasa theory, which is all in this book called Philosophy in English, or Modern Indian Philosophy in English, or Philosophy During the Colonial Times. So these kind of books by Nalini Bhushan and J. Garfield are coming out now with compendiums, different compendiums where all systems are included. It's not as systematic as the earlier versions of systems were. But that's not it. Still, when you're doing that, you still refer back to the text, to the textual meaning, because the definitions of the concepts that you're dealing with in Indian philosophy have a given. Take, for instance, the concept of dharma. The concept of dharma has many meanings, and each of those meanings is given by a context where it is used. For example, dharma would mean essential nature. It's the dharma of a river to flow down. So as an essential nature, dharma becomes mixed up with the dharma or the duty or the essential duty of human beings inside a caste or a class or a particular age or even a gender. It is the essential dharma of a woman to give birth and take care of children. Reproduction is her dharma. So from somewhere where it becomes essential nature, it becomes essential duty. And from essential duty, it goes on to be the right thing to do. Because in the Mahabharata, you don't find dharma interpreted like this. It is like when your actions are in sync with the cosmic will of God or of cosmic natural law, and the cosmic law and your law are matching, then you call it dharma. So doing what the universe wants, or is the good of the universe, is sort of dharma in the Mahabharata. It's very difficult to understand what the universe wants, but you can listen and you know this is for the greater common good, right? Similarly, so dhamma in Buddhism is a completely different kind of a word. It's basically to refer to the kinds of things, materials that we think are there in the world. So when you talk about dharma as if it is given by one of the purusharthas, one of the four purposes of human life, it seems very ambiguous. And this ambiguity is good, because each time you translate this word dharma into English, into Persian, into Arabic, into German, it will get a new set of meanings that you can play around with. And so playing around with concepts is possible. But when you freeze dharma within a context, within a philosophy, it freezes. And when it freezes, you cannot play around with it. It becomes artifactual. It becomes like a museum piece. So my professor, Dr. Sundar Sarukai, suggested that translation itself is a method in philosophy, because you can translate. When you translate, you're not translating just the word or the term, you're translating worldviews. You're taking a worldview of a term in one particular culture and translating it to another culture where the worldview is completely different. And perhaps this translation would give you alternatives and very different ways of conceptualizing. So, philosophy which conceptualizes breaks through the barriers of the systems. And that's what I've been trying to do in some of my work before. And that's what a lot of other people are also engaged in, concepts. So rather than look at textual traditions, if you really want to engage with Indian philosophy, look at conceptualizations. Look at concepts and how they're used in different texts and translate them, and then you would see that they translate into something much more wholesome. But when you get into translation and when you play around with concepts, you're going to come up with roadblocks. The first roadblock is that people who study philosophy believe that you have to have textual authority. You can't just misread a text. You cannot suddenly say that, hey, listen, Bhagavad Gita has got karma, and karma is actually about not work, but actually about the karma that visits us, like the fruit of the work, right? Karma phala. But traditional Sanskritists know that karma is not karma phala, karma is something you do. But then, is doing and getting what you're doing the same, the effect and the cause being the same? Is that possible? So these are the kinds of questions you start asking about karma, and they'll pull out a textbook and say, no, 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 look, karma comes from the etymology of this particular word. This is how it is used. This is the sentence. This is the right way to think about it. So when thinking becomes right because of a textual tradition that's very, very strong and Sanskritic, you don't get to include other kinds of thinking about it because there's no Sanskrit text to prove that that particular philosophical thinking existed. How would you do philosophy of hunger? As far as I know, none of the Sanskrit texts talk about hunger at all. Maybe yoga, fasting. But hunger itself is not philosophized, or we don't have a text which talks about hunger in the philosophical traditions because hungry people never did philosophy. But there must have been a philosophy of hunger because if a person is always hungry, he always starts to think about hunger. What's about a philosophy of body? What about the philosophy of untouchability, philosophy of oppression, philosophy of being slaves to a system that you can't overthrow? What kind of philosophy would emerge from these other categories of people who are not so privileged enough to produce philosophies about metaphysics? So these kind of philosophies would only show up if you look into the lived world and the experienced world of people. And sometimes the lived world doesn't occur inside Sanskrit texts and the systems of philosophy. It occurs in asystemic texts, such as the texts of poetry, of songs, of funeral dirges, of songs sung at the death of a person, in marriage songs exchanged between women where they're teasing the bridegroom, in the poems of bhakti, in the poetry of revolutionaries, in the stories and silly mythologies of the folk people, in the dramatic performances in the villages. So Indian philosophy, without the systems, includes all this and much more. And so I'm not saying Indian philosophical systems are bad or they should not be taught. What I'm saying is expand the notion of philosophy. Let's not do what the colonials did to Indian philosophy to our own other alternative systems of Indian philosophy, where the systemic Indian philosophy ignores the asystemic Indian philosophy. So the moment the colonials encountered Indian philosophy, they decided that it's not a philosophy. That it's some sort of, they had to give it the epithet of Indian philosophy. So the moment we say Indian philosophy, we think of the 6 systems of philosophy and all other systems, all other thoughts, all other poetry, all other literature, any other philosophical thinking that doesn't fit into the notion of the systems of philosophy or doesn't have a Sanskrit text or some kind of textual authority, not even Sanskrit, even vernacular text, something that doesn't have what we recognize as philosophy, we throw out. and we ignore. We call it myth or superstition or whatever. But perhaps in these myths and superstitions and lived concepts, there exist those philosophies which will actually enrich our understanding of our own systems of philosophy. Because when these philosophical systems were being developed, they did not call themselves as systems of philosophy. They were just doing thinking. So, conceptualization, thinking about the world, pondering on the questions of the world, it is not the right of only Sanskrit texts. It is not the right of a few Pali texts. It is not the right of certain individuals sitting in this ivory tower deciding what is philosophy, what is not. If all thinking were to be philosophy, we would be the richer for it, not the poorer. So, diversity of philosophy requires us to decolonize our own minds and include much more variety of thinking. And that will actually lead to an enrichment of Indian philosophy and take us out of the system boxes. So, with that, wait for the next video and we'll talk a little bit about lived concepts. Perhaps we will start maybe thinking about where there is a philosophy of women. And with that, goodbye and have a nice week.